Welcome to The Debate. Imagine a predator who doesn't bare their teeth, but, instead shows you their wounds. Today, we are decoding the hidden, often terrifying world of covert narcissism.
Right. It's a completely invisible kind of destruction.
Exactly. We are looking at a psychological profile that systematically dismantles relationships, families, workplaces, all while the architect of that destruction hides behind a carefully constructed facade of humility, self-deprecation, and, well, suffering. And the disagreement we are exploring today is really fundamental. To truly understand and dismantle this threat, should we focus our analytical lens on the calculated predatory mechanics of the abuser?
Or is the defining characteristic of this pathology actually found in the profound reality-warping psychological destruction experienced by the victim?
Right. I argue that we must strictly analyze the darker predatory side of the narcissist. We have to dissect the exact mechanisms of how they weaponize incompetence, manufacture pity, and, utilize their supposed vulnerability to gain absolute power over their targets.
And I come at it from a different way. While analyzing the mechanics of the abuser is clinically fascinating, focusing solely on their tactical maneuvers completely misses the insidious nature of the damage done to the target.
But without understanding the tactics, how do we...
Well, because the true nature of covert narcissism is only understood through the victim's perspective. It is about the invisible red flags. It is the absolute bone-deep exhaustion of walking on eggshells for years.
Yeah.
It is the systematic dismantling of a person's reality until they are left in a state of hypervigilance, genuinely questioning their own sanity.
Well, to begin this psychological investigation, we really need to lay the groundwork for the behavioral profile of what the clinical literature often refers to as the vulnerable narcissist.
Yeah, the vulnerable type.
Right. When we talk about covert narcissists, we are talking about highly calculated psychological predators. Let's be very clear about what they are.
Okay.
They possess the exact same core of entitlement, self-absorption, and exploitative expectations as your classic loud, grandiose narcissist. The person who demands the center of attention at every party.
The one everyone immediately spots.
Exactly. The difference here is entirely in the presentation and the methodology, because the covert narcissist lacks the social confidence, the charisma, or the extroversion to demand admiration directly. They construct a false self built on passive superiority.
Right, and that tendency is incredibly destructive.
It is. The research identifies a specific framework at play here called the tendency for interpersonal victimhood, or TIV. We have to look at how it functions mechanically. They use their introverted, shy, or even outwardly depressed persona as a tactical mask. They operate with a deeply ingrained sense of moral elitism.
Meaning they think their pain makes them special.
Yes, exactly. The internal logic dictates that their suffering makes them purer, more profound, or more legitimate than everyone else in the room. They chronically ruminate on past slights, which provides them with a permanent internalized justification for vindictiveness.
Yeah.
It is a brilliant, albeit dark adaptation. They effectively hide their complete lack of empathy behind a facade of suffering, which forces everyone around them to cater to their needs, while the narcissist successfully appears to be the one who constantly needs help.
I hear the structural analysis, but by framing them as these brilliant, calculated masterminds, we lose sight of the actual terror inflicted on the partner, or the child, or the employee.
I wouldn't say lose sight.
Well, what you are clinically labeling a tactical mask, the victim is experiencing as a slow, invisible psychological strangulation. The core of covert narcissism isn't just a creation of a false self inside the abuser's mind.
Right.
It is the creation of a distorted, shared reality in the home or the workplace. The abuser slowly and methodically conditions the target to bear the entire emotional weight of the relationship. We are talking about subtle, daily tactics of emotional invalidation and covert gaslighting.
How does that look in practice, though, from your clinical perspective?
It looks like a person slowly losing their mind. The victim is systematically trained to believe that every heavy sigh, every moment of sullen withdrawal, and every sudden household crisis is entirely their fault.
Wow.
Yeah. We aren't talking about a simple conflict or a bad marriage. We are talking about neurological impact. The damage manifests as chronic anxiety, severe depression, and eventually complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD.
Which is severe.
Incredibly severe. CPTSD isn't just a label, it is a structural change in the brain caused by chronic, unpredictable emotional unsafety. The victim entirely loses their sense of self because they are forced to constantly navigate this funhouse mirror of reality where the person actively hurting them is perpetually claiming to be the bleeding victim.
Which brings us to the exact mechanism of how that funhouse mirror is built. Let's look at the trap itself. A covert narcissist secures their narcissistic supply, which is the attention, validation, and control they require to stabilize their incredibly fragile ego, by manufacturing crises.
Right.
They utilize what the literature calls virtuous victim signaling and pseudo-altruism. They will offer you a gift or offer to help you with a major project, but it is entirely a setup.
Yeah, there's always a cost.
Always. It's a transaction with invisible, predatory strings attached, explicitly designed to establish a debt. Wait, look at how they use pity. They project a helpless image to the world, deliberately drawing in highly conscientious people.
That targeting is exactly what makes it so insidious.
Precisely. They will act overwhelmed in the workplace, for example. They will let a situation deteriorate, miss a deadline, and then quietly radiate resentment until a capable coworker steps in to rescue them.
Ugh, yes.
The moment the rescuer steps in, the narcissist has them. They have secured a reliable source of supply who will do the actual heavy lifting, while the narcissist maintains the moral high ground of having tried their absolute best against impossible odds. It is strategic helplessness.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. When you call it strategic helplessness, you make it sound like a sterile game of chess.
Well, it is highly structured.
But you are ignoring the devastating, very human toll this takes on highly empathetic people. The narcissist doesn't just put out a general distress signal into the void. They deliberately target the victim's conscientiousness and compassion.
Okay, sure.
They specifically select people who cannot stand to see others suffer. This is exactly what trips victims up. Think about a normal, healthy relationship. If a highly empathetic person sees their partner in pain, their biological, psychological instinct is to soothe and assist.
Naturally.
Let's say you have a big presentation at work tomorrow, and suddenly your partner comes down with a mysterious, debilitating migraine and starts sighing heavily from the bedroom. Your instinct is to drop everything and care for them.
And they know you will do that.
Right. But the tragedy is that the covert narcissist weaponizes the absolute best parts of the victim's humanity against them. The victim gets trapped in an endless cycle of caretaking. They think to themselves, if I just love them enough, if I just explain my feelings clearly enough, if I just help them through this one more crisis, they will finally feel secure.
But they never do.
Never. The void is bottomless. You cannot fill it. The victim's own empathy literally becomes the chains that bind them to the abuser.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If the victim's empathy is the very mechanism of their destruction, doesn't that prove the predator's calculated brilliance is the core issue we must decode?
I don't know about brilliance.
Well, think of the covert narcissist's emotional void like a broken check engine light on a car. The light comes on indicating a critical failure. The conscientious partner pulls over immediately, they check the oil, they replace the spark plugs, they spend all their time, money, and energy trying to fix the engine so the light will go off.
Right.
But what they don't realize is that the light isn't connected to the engine at all. The light is wired to simply stay on, explicitly to keep the partner trapped in the mechanic's shop, constantly working on a car that cannot be fixed.
That's a dark analogy.
But accurate. The narcissist's survival depends on their ability to perfectly mimic that distress signal. If we don't study the exact mechanics of how that broken light is wired, the partner will never understand why their nurturing instinct is draining them dry.
They will understand it when we validate the reality of their destruction. The internal wiring of the check engine light doesn't matter to the person who has spent 10 years trapped in the garage, bankrupting their own soul.
Fair point, but
What matters is identifying that the distress signal is a fabrication, because we have to look at what happens when the victim finally exhausts themselves.
right.
What happens when the empathetic partner finally realizes the void cannot be filled,
The engine cannot be fixed, and they attempt to set a healthy boundary. The manufactured pity instantly vanishes and the punishment begins.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. The pity doesn't just vanish, it mutates into a highly specific, defensive structural mechanism. This is what we call the shame-rage cycle. You have to understand that underneath the false modesty and the sighing, the covert narcissist has an incredibly fragile, almost non-existent self-esteem. They have no internal generator for self-worth.
None at all.
Right. They are completely terrified of being exposed as inadequate or ordinary. So when the partner sets a boundary or offers even mild constructive feedback, like simply asking them to load the dishwasher, it completely shatters their grand illusion.
Yeah, it triggers them completely.
The narcissist experiences profound, intolerable shame. But because their psychological structure cannot process shame, their brain instantly converts it into entitlement rage. It deflects the pain outward.
And it's how that rage is expressed that destroys the victim.
Exactly. Because they are covert, this rage isn't usually expressed through screaming, breaking dishes, or physical intimidation like a grandiose narcissist might use. It is expressed through severe passive aggression.
Yes.
That's not depression, that's weaponized guilt. They will use the silent treatment. They will drop backhanded compliments that cut to the core of the partner's insecurities.
Which is devastating.
They will completely withdraw physical affection, sulk in the corner during a family holiday, and actively withhold critical information just to watch the target scramble and panic. It is a highly effective, deeply calculated way to externalize their own internal shame and force the partner to carry the weight of it.
And let's break down what that weaponized guilt actually does to the human being on the receiving end, because it is catastrophic. This silent treatment isn't just an expression of anger or someone needing space to cool down.
No, it's punitive.
It is a form of psychological terror. It is covert gaslighting in its purest form. When a covert narcissist gives you the silent treatment for 3 days over a perceived slight, they are plunging you into a sensory deprivation tank of affection.
Which is incredibly disorienting.
Disorienting doesn't even cover it. The victim is forced to desperately search their own memory, replaying every single interaction from the last 48 hours, trying to figure out what horrible, unforgivable thing they must have done to deserve such cold, punishing withdrawal.
Right. They take on the blame.
It forces the victim into a state of severe cognitive dissonance. Human beings are wired to resolve interpersonal tension. It's a survival mechanism. So the victim eventually cracks under the suffocating pressure of the silence.
Yeah.
And what do? They end up apologizing. The victim literally apologizes for the abuser's behavior. Do you see the absolute tragedy there? The victim entirely erases their own boundaries, their own needs, and their own perception of reality, just to restore a baseline of peace in the house. The abuser doesn't even have to raise their voice to establish absolute totalitarian psychological dominance.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you are treating the victim's confusion and cognitive dissonance as an unfortunate accidental byproduct of the abuse. In fact, the victim's confusion is the exact engineered objective of the narcissist's design.
Okay, how so?
Well, this dynamic is perfectly mapped by the Cartman drama triangle, which is a vital concept in behavioral profiling. The covert narcissist is an absolute master at navigating this structural trap. Think about how a typical weekend argument plays out.
All right.
The narcissist always enters the dynamic as the victim. They sigh about how hard their week was, subtly suggesting they can't handle their responsibilities. They draw the empathetic target in to play the rescuer.
And the target steps up because they care.
Exactly. The dynamic stabilizes there for a while. The narcissist gets their needs met without having to take any adult responsibility. And the target feels valued and needed for their caretaking. It feels like love.
But it's not.
No, it isn't, because the moment the rescuer experiences burnout or attempts to hold the narcissist accountable for something they promised to do, the narcissist instantly shifts roles. They flip to the persecutor.
Right.
They use the exact passive aggression, the weaponized guilt, and the covert gaslighting we just discussed to intensely punish the target. The target is then pushed down into the victim role, feeling entirely helpless, blamed, and confused.
It's a vicious cycle.
And the absolute darkest, most manipulative part of this structure, the narcissist will often then swoop back in, offering a tiny crumb of affection, temporarily playing the rescuer to the very person they just psychologically devastated. It creates a powerful trauma bond.
Mm-hmm.
The confusion is an accident. The systematic rotation of those roles, victim, rescuer, persecutor, is exactly what keeps the target paralyzed and trapped.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that identifying the architecture of the drama triangle is only half the battle?
In what way?
Intellectualizing the abuse, naming the roles, mapping the trap, it doesn't actually stop the bleeding. The real focus must be on the victim's survival, escape, and recovery. Because the harsh reality is that you cannot reason with a covert narcissist.
True. You cannot sit down at the kitchen table and therapy them out of this behavior while you are still in the relationship, because they view your very existence as merely an extension of their own ego. To escape the trap, the victim has to do something that goes against their deepest, most fundamental empathetic nature. They have to practice radical emotional detachment.
Which is incredibly difficult for the type of person the narcissist targets.
Oh, it is the hardest thing they will ever do. In trauma therapy, we teach a behavioral technique called the gray rock method.
Right, gray rocking.
Exactly. The concept is literal. You make yourself as boring, unreactive, and uninteresting as a gray rock on the ground. When the narcissist deploys their weaponized guilt, you do not investigate it. When they sigh heavily from the other room, you do not ask what's wrong.
You just ignore it. Yes, if they drop a passive-aggressive insult, you respond with a flat, emotionless, or okay. You offer absolutely no emotional response, neither positive nor negative. You intentionally flatline your emotional presence.
Starving them of supply.
Exactly. By doing this, you starve them of the narcissistic supply they are trying to extract. Healing requires the victim to absolutely abandon the rescuer role. They must stop trying to fix the narcissist and realize the check engine light is a lie. They have to seek trauma-informed therapy to unlearn the massive web of lies they've internalized, rebuild their shattered self-esteem, and learn to recognize these invisible red flags so they never ever fall into the trap again.
And I would argue that successfully practicing the gray rock method requires a profound analytical understanding of the predator's mechanics. You have to know exactly what they are fishing for so you can systematically, consciously deny it to them.
Yeah.
Education is key. Covert narcissism is a deeply destructive, predatory structure built on passive superiority and strategic helplessness. It is a pathology that demands we look strictly past the tears, the apologies, and the heavy sighs to see the cold, calculated manipulation underneath.
Right.
By decoding their use of moral elitism, the weaponization of pity, and their absolute mastery of the Cartman drama triangle, we expose the mechanics of their control. Only by understanding the exact clinical nature of the trap can we begin to dismantle it.
And my perspective remains rooted in the human cost. The true horror of covert narcissism is not found in the complexity of the abuser's mind, but in the invisible psychological toll it exacts from the victim. It is a form of abuse that leaves no physical bruises, making it uniquely isolating and terrifying. The victim is left entirely drained of their life force, wondering if they are the crazy one, while the abuser is often viewed by the outside world, their friends, and their community as a quiet, misunderstood, long-suffering martyr.
Which is so common.
It is. We must validate the victim's reality first and foremost. Understanding the profound neurological damage of covert gaslighting, the sheer exhaustion of enduring the shame-rage cycle, and the absolute necessity of ironclad boundaries is the only true path to healing and reclaiming one's life.
Well, we can certainly agree on the chilling reality of these behaviors. The damage is undeniable. Whether viewed through the analytical lens of the predator's calculated tactics or the empathetic lens of the victim's profound trauma, covert narcissism is a highly damaging, deeply insidious, and far too often overlooked form of psychological abuse.
Absolutely. There is immense, life-changing empowerment that comes from finally having a name for this invisible abuse. For anyone listening to this discussion, if these patterns, the constant walking on eggshells, the weaponized silence, the endless draining of your empathy, If they sound eerily familiar in your own marriages, friendships, or workplaces, please know that you are not crazy.
Yeah.
Your exhaustion is incredibly real, and it is a completely valid response to being manipulated.
There's much more to explore in the psychological literature regarding how to establish and maintain the ironclad boundaries necessary to protect yourself from these personalities. It is a subject that requires continuous learning and vigilance.
Which really brings us back to where we started today. When you encounter someone who seems to perpetually show you their wounds, who constantly needs you to step in and save them from a hostile world, ask yourself a very difficult question. Are they actually asking for healing, or are they carefully setting a trap?
A deeply unsettling question, but one worth keeping close. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.